Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by the National Science Teachers Association. Find out more at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. And today we're talking about one of our favorite topics. It's writing about science.
I want to make sure there are good stories there. That's what I kind of always emphasize at the start. And beyond that, I want, a scientific topic as kind of the central theme or idea, but I do want something that will allow me to jump off into other areas of human life.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first, I'm your co-host Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartow.
And this is a podcast about listening to science, learning about science, reading about science, and as you heard, a clip about writing about science.
Well, and one of the things I like about the show is that instead of just about science, it really does, we do try to focus on what we could bring back into the classroom for a science educator. And along that vein, I worked with someone this summer. I met someone this summer. That sounds like a
Tell
science.
us more, dear Abby.
I went to a class this summer, and at the class was a professor named Greg Smith, and he taught about place-based education, which I actually think has a lot of potential within the science classroom.
Place-based?
We think about hands-on place-based education.
Okay.
In any case, Greg was starting to think about doing a podcast with the National Education Policy Center.
Okay.
And so I actually coached him through a couple things, like what we do and how we do it. So we sat down over many a dinner and a lunch and talked a little bit about podcasting, and it was kind of fun to talk about something that we've done for 10 years.
Oh, neat.
But in any case, he just released a couple episodes, and I think it's important for us to also share what we like to listen to as well. But this one's a great opener. So his first interview, he interviewed Faith Boninger on student privacy. And so this is the National Education Policy Center.
Oh.
And yeah, so it's basically it's about a report, Asleep at the Switch: Schoolhouse Commercialism, Student Privacy, and the Failure of Policymaking. And this is something that if listeners, you know us as science educators and podcasters, but Dale and I also we kind of like this vein of thinking about student privacy and protecting students' rights online. And so this is right up our alley, but I definitely recommend it. I'm going to put some links in the show notes for you, but this is the National Education Policy Center, and look out for these interviews.
Awesome recommendation. And you made another recommendation to me, which is today's guest. It's Sam Kean again, talking about his new book.
So yeah, we've had Sam on the show before, and he first started to talk to us about a book on the periodic table, which was called The Disappearing Spoon. And this one... I know it was just Halloween, but no. This is his latest book is about decoding the secrets of the air around us. But let's have him back on.
Hello, my name is Sam Kean. I am a writer of popular science books, including The Disappearing Spoon and Violinist, and most recently of Cesars' Last Breath.
So how is this book different than your other two? We actually had you on the show earlier for The Violinist Thumb, and even before that with your periodic table book on The Disappearing Spoon. Or the Disappearing Spoon book on the periodic table.
Yeah, so I've written about a different topic for each of my books: the periodic table, the human genome, the human brain. This book went back a little bit more toward chemistry, but what I focused on really was gases, in particular gases in the atmosphere, things we're breathing. And we all know what the big ones are, of course, things like oxygen and nitrogen, but I really wanted to dive deep into all of the different gases that we inhale, all the little bits of refrigerant and anesthesia that are floating around in the air around us that we inhale all the time. We don't really think about where they come from, how they affect us, how they've affected human civilization and human life. So it's kind of a deep dive into those gases, and the premise is to, tell a funny or spooky or weird story about each of those gases and where they come from. So that's kind of the premise of the book.
Now I'm getting freaked out. What am I breathing?
Yeah, people get a little worried about it sometimes, but, I tell them there's not too much to worry about. The air is generally healthy, depending on where you are. But, it's just interesting to think about We really take the air for granted in that we're inhaling something like 20,000 times every single day, but beyond the major constituents, we really don't think what it is we are inhaling. And the fact that some of it is billions of years old and some of it is very, very new, something that only arose in the past, 50 or even 100 years, things that were never existed on Earth before human civilization came up.
Oh, wow.
So you had in the first book that we interviewed you for, which was The Disappearing Spoon, you took something that was maybe foreign to a lot of people or intimidating to a lot of people, which is the periodic table, and you brought it down to more of a user level that kind of personified the periodic table a little bit more and told the reader, where do we see the periodic table in everyday life? Are you now taking something that's everyday life, like the air we breathe, and trying to put a more scientific spin on that? And is that fair to say?
That's part of it. Trying to explain some of the science about the atmosphere itself and how it works just on a daily basis. I mean, we all are aware of the wind blowing around or weather, things like that, but we really don't think about how it works exactly. And in fact, the title story of the book, Cesar's Last Breath, is a good example of that. It comes from sort of a classic problem, a challenge problem that teachers often give to chemistry and physics students, which is, what are the odds that right now you're breathing a molecule that Julius Caesar also breathed during his last breath when he was being assassinated in Rome in 44 BC? And initially, that seems impossible. You think, a breath is the most ephemeral thing ever, and that happened so long ago, it seems impossible that any of his breath might still be around. But when you look at it, and you look at how the atmosphere works, what a breath is made of, the individual molecules, how long they last, it actually turns out, and I kind of go through the reasoning in the introduction, but it turns out that odds are very, very good that you are still breathing air that Julius Caesar breathed.
Really?
And it wasn't just Julius Caesar. Yeah, I mean, you could talk about any of your heroes from history, like Amelia Earhart or Confucius, or whoever you want to talk about. Their breath is still in the air around us. We're still breathing the same molecules they did. So breath is one of those things. It's probably, the closest connection we have to history in a lot of cases, the real material connection. We're still breathing the same molecules of air that these people have been breathing for, hundreds of thousands of years.
So that I could apply that to my enemies as well. Like the cat litter stench that I smell is also being transported somewhere else to the world to everyone else that loves and hates and is very neutral to me as well, right?
Yeah, it does apply to enemies too, unfortunately.
Fine.
So it's kind of
he's going to smell my cat litter sooner or later.
I'll just think that in the back of my head now.
Wow.
You can put that on your enemies, though, so that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, someone cut me off at that intersection. Well, they'll get my cat litter later. So, all right. So now you've done a very fantastic job about storytelling, kind of like taking scientific concepts and kind of distilling it down to something that I don't want to say appealing, because I think for many people science itself is appealing, but trying to get more of a mass audience to appreciate the science that we see every day. And that to me, when I was teaching chemistry in the classroom, I loved finding those little snippets and historical pieces that you could inject into your class and talking about that. So how much of that though is based off of how much is conjecture on your part from what your research is, and how much of it is straight up the truth in that? And I guess trying to think about do you get pushback and people saying, well, that can't be real?
No, not really. I do base it in stories. I really think stories are a good thing to emphasize in a book like this, in that I want the science to be in there. I want good, solid science. I want you to learn something. But I think one of the better ways to get people interested, get people excited, whether they're students or lay readers or whatever it is to tell them stories, because we're human beings. We like drama and conflict and heroes and villains and all those things. And if you can give that in a science story, then I think it makes it all the more exciting and interesting. It just gives it a human dimension that really appeals to us on some sort of natural level. So I think that's really important. And with all of the stories that I tell in the book, hundreds of thousands of stories, however many there are in them, I really do try to base them in historical fact. And, when I don't know exactly what's happening there, I just admit that. Say, we don't know exactly what happened here, but here are the legends surrounding it. Or,
Sure.
Here is what people have said about it, something like that. So it is very factually based. I make sure I do as much research into the history as I do into the science of it. And then, there's some speculation at times, but I think as long as you're clear for the reader what you're speculating about a little bit, and then based in fact most of the time, I think that's fine. I think people understand that too. So no, I haven't heard much pushback about that at all.
And by no means was I being accusatory there. I love your work, and I do.
No.
I do actually look into some of the footnotes that you have there as well sometimes, and look into the story a little bit more because that pulls me into it. I think about that in terms of teaching a class too. You have to be thinking as a teacher. At what level do I need to drill down to the facts and the essence of this story versus the balance of just telling a good story. And as teachers and as science teachers, we have to kind of balance that out. And for some students, that's going to differentiate their experience as well. Some need more of those hard facts, and some need more of that research-based and the numbers, and some need less of that. And of course, I'm sure that's something you experience when you are putting together your writing. And how many drafts do you go through where you're thinking, this was a tidbit of research that I really want to include, but it just didn't flow in the writing? Do you have that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sort of a volume writer, I guess, in that I write a lot and I throw away a lot. So I have lots and lots of drafts of everything that I write, just because I think that's the way I work, I guess. And yeah, it is a balance. The first drafts, sometimes I'm trying to cram too much in there, and then after setting it aside for a bit, looking at it later, you just realize that the flow of the story is being interrupted. And if it's a chapter that I'm sort of focused on, if it's a chapter where I'm sort of focused just on one story, then sometimes, those little asides and anecdotes do get in the way, and I end up cutting them, or sometimes just sort of relegating them to a footnote. So that's kind of why I like that footnote structure, in that I don't have to interrupt the main story. If you just are interested in the main story, you can keep going. But there are sometimes just little tidbits I can't resist putting in there. So having the footnotes there sort of allows me to save them, I guess. And I don't have to feel like I'm throwing them away, even if they don't quite fit in the main story.
The footnotes are like the book's DVD extras almost, right?
Yeah, like a little director's commentary or something.
Sure.
Or, like extras, I guess. Deleted scenes, I guess.
There you go. How do you select your topics, your book topics? Previous books and like this one, for example?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm definitely looking for the stories. I want to make sure there are good stories there. That's what I kind of always emphasize at the start. And beyond that, I want, a scientific topic as kind of the central theme or idea, but I do want something that will allow me to jump off into other areas of human life. I don't want to feel like I'm just confined to the one central scientific topic. So I want to be able to talk about poisons or war or art or a lot of different other things, and really show the connections between the science topic and those other areas of human life. So I really like having that central idea, but not being confined to it or just sort of restricted to it, which I guess is why, I haven't done certain topics. Like I studied physics as an undergrad, but I haven't really done a hardcore physics book, in part because, some of the topics you get into in physics every now and then, especially modern physics like particle physics or cosmology, I think it's a little harder to relate that to other areas of human life. So I haven't gotten into that topic, in part because I just haven't found the right entrance to it, I guess. Hopefully someday, but I just haven't quite found it yet.
Do you have a big notebook of just future books that you go through?
Yeah, it's on my computer, but it is a list of, some of them are bigger topics that I might want to look at. Some of them are people I want to write about someday. Some of them are just little tiny anecdotes that I think, I could probably, fit that in at some point in some book I'm writing. So it's kind of a potpourri of different topics, ranging
Are you writing
from
multiple
possible
books?
chapters to... I'm not writing multiple books usually, just focused on the one. But always coming up with ideas or just listing them. And sometimes you go back and you're like, it's a terrible idea. Like, that would never work out for something. But other times, you're like, I think there's something there. So you go back and you refine it a little bit or whatever. But it's helpful to have that list, I think, for writers.
Okay. So as we're talking right now about you as an author, and I'm thinking through my head about parallels with students in science who have to communicate their thoughts about what they've witnessed or observed or measured in a lab, or just even their ideas about science as well. And we're seeing a big tie into science and literacy lately. And I guess could you give a few hints to the science student who needs to write about science or do some science writing? What would your advice be there?
Well, a couple of things I could think of. One is, I think when you are trying to understand what's going on, I think you can think about it as a story in some sense. Like, you're telling yourself a story about what's going on or why this thing happened in the natural world or this plant you're observing or whatever it is. And I think even scientists, when they're doing their work, that is how they understand things, especially at the beginning. They think about themselves struggling with this or not being able to. There's a breakthrough, and then suddenly they grasp it, or they know what's going on, or something totally unrelated will pop in their mind and will help them make sense of it, or they're using an analogy, something like that. So I think there are sort of storytelling elements involved because it is just the way the human brain works. We tell ourselves stories. It's how we live our lives, how we understand things around us. So I think sort of embracing that can be one good thing. The other thing I would say that is related to that is sometimes when you're reading, a textbook or a scientific paper, over the years, and it's been sort of the standard way to write these papers, is that they leave out all of the sort of the good stuff, I guess. They leave out all the heartbreak or the mistakes that they made or all those other things.
Sure.
And they tend to focus on just the results. And so I think it can be even a little intimidating looking at a textbook or a scientific paper and thinking, wow, they got this science perfect. They probably got it right the first time because they're so smart or something. That's never the case. They never just got it right the first time. There are lots of mistakes in there. And I think it might even help students to know that there were a lot of dead ends, a lot of cul-de-sacs where the scientists screwed things up or they almost gave up in despair, and that the frustrations you might be feeling or something are perfectly normal, and that's how science gets done. So don't be intimidated if it seems, this pristine, perfect work that you're reading about. There was a lot more to it than that.
Well, and that's important because I remember vividly from my high school science teacher, Sarah Clough, and basically she came out very, intimidatingly telling us that there's no such thing as a scientific method, and it was one of those things that grabbed me like, what? This is something that I've been learning from middle school, and I memorized the steps. What do I do now? But her point, of course, was that science itself is really messy, and it never happens in the way it's portrayed. And so, that's a great point for students to remember as well.
Yeah, it just makes it a little easier and a little more approachable. You don't have to worry about making mistakes or just screwing something up. You can know that there's another day coming up, and that just because you didn't get it perfect the first time, you can still make a great discovery or do something, really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. One last question is, I'm thinking about this with Cesar's Last Breath, and we're talking about air and gases in the environment. Is there any kind of, I don't want to say a political spin on that, but obviously this is something that's captivated our news in the recent decade and arguably more than that. But is there any spin on that we should be looking into?
Well, I do think it would have been sort of derelict of my duty, if I didn't, address things like climate change in a book about gases in the atmosphere. So I had to take it on at some point.
Good.
I didn't want to give people the impression that it's just a book about the environment or climate change or anything like that. But, given the overwhelming scientific consensus that climate change is happening, it's real, it's something we need to think about, I wanted to address it. I wanted to make it clear that those are things that I believe in and that we need to, I think, start addressing some of those issues. And in the book, I talk about them a little bit, just kind of explain the basics of it, but also talk a little bit about, what people are proposing to do and some of the more wacky ideas out there, things like geoengineering, where they're going to try to possibly engineer the atmosphere.
There's a movie right now, Geostorm or something like that, where it goes wrong.
Oh, really?
Terribly. Yeah, it looks awful.
Yeah. Well, that's the other part is it could go wrong. We only get, it's not like you can have multiple experiments here. There's only one shot you get to do this. So it's a little scary in some ways, trying to think about these ideas. They're kind of exhilarating and frightening all at the same time, I think. I guess the other thing, though, is that I want people to know that it's not all doom and gloom either. I think once people hear about, it's the environment, like it's going to be nothing but destruction. There's nothing I can do. And they just give up. And I think that's really unfortunate. And there have been some environmental successes in the past. Things like, the hole in the ozone layer is recovering some, not perfectly, but it's recovering some. Mm-hmm. Things like acid rain, we've been able to reduce that a lot. So I don't want people to get the wrong impression. This is a problem, a serious problem, but there are things we can do as well. And in the book, I talk about what some of those things are and what we can do about them.
One last curiosity. How many times do you mention phlogiston in the book?
Phlogiston comes up a few times. There's a chapter about oxygen and about Joseph Priestley. So, who was a big proponent of that. He really believed in that. So, yeah, that's one of those old kind of hoary scientific ideas that are fun to talk about. It's just sort of odd episode in science history.
That was just a personal curiosity, but thank you for addressing that.
Your favorite fake elements, so to speak, or whatever.
I love to just kind of talk about that as this used to be a thing, and this used to be something that people believed, and then it of course, science came in and told us that this wasn't the case, and it's a great model for, again, telling students how science actually works, and sometimes what we truly believe in the popular culture just isn't so.
Like the ether.
Yeah. So one thing I really like about that story is, with Priestley especially, you can see how someone was sort of desperate to hold on to his ideas and the mental contortions that someone would go through in order to hold on to the idea.
Oh, like Ptolemy's model, where they put all those extra rings on the solar system to try to make
epicycles on,
try to make it match it afterwards. Like, nobody pulled him aside and said, dude, no.
You're embarrassing yourself,
Well, thank you so much for your time, Sam. I look forward to reading Caesar's Last Breath. It's out on shelves and in bookstores and electronically. We look forward to reading it.
Thanks much, Sam.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
For links and other information related to this episode, visit laboutloud.com. You can send us your questions and comments at laboutloud.com/contact.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure you've subscribed on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting platform. And if you really enjoyed it, consider leaving us a rating or a review. Your feedback helps others find our show.
Until next time, I'm Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartell.